I'm Joe Leah, here with my colleague Ignacio Pavez, both from the Fowler Center at Case Western. We kind of fused our presentations because we have different elements we're going to cover as we go through. I thought I'd give you a little picture of Cleveland. That's actually the building where the Fowler Center is, that swirly building that we all get inspired from as we walk in. Nothing like Lutgert. We've heard a lot about purpose this week, and yesterday and the day before, which, as we think about where does business and management fit in this whole new paradigm and new paradigm thinking, that's an interesting place to start. Because I think if we asked a lot of people in the public, looking towards tomorrow, what is the purpose of business and what is their perceptions of business, I think we would probably maybe get some thoughts like this. Companies that represent what business is all about. Ruthlessness, corruption, maximizing profit at the cost of everything else. And the logic of the economist Milton Friedman, who said the only social purpose of business is to maximize profit for shareholders. It's only to break the law, supposedly. So if we just look at that picture, and here's you can't quite see it. That's the Gulf of Mexico, near my home, where the BP spill wasn't too far away. We could have a bleak picture, but we don't, because as we've been discovering this morning and as we've discovered over the last couple of days, there are a growing group of businesses that are doing things in a different way, right? That are driven by different values, driven by wanting to make a difference, driven by a greater purpose. And that's the exploration of that is really what drives our research, that drives what we're interested in. So try to understand, what is it that makes business leaders pursue a greater purpose in their business, exercise compassion in the workplace in the way they treat people that are working in their organizations, build a culture where every person is doing a meaningful work, creating a positive impact on society. So our focus is on trying to understand why that is and what's behind it. And some of the progress from here to here, sometimes we might make it through the economic case for sustainability, as we saw from Mauricio's slides, that's a very strong case. That's part of it. But part of it also, I think, and this is what we're exploring, is that it's really about a change of consciousness. It's a change of understanding. It's a change of what really the purpose of business is. That's what drives the research streams that we have at the Fowler Center. Just to give you a framework for that. Starting over the last 15 years, really, building from a basis of positive psychology, appreciative inquiry, concepts like that. We've really built a practice or an activity aimed at trying to understand how business can be an agent for world benefit, how business can be a force for good. And we weave together multiple things, both research streams, and Ignacio will share some of the research streams we're working on, dropship outreach through various workshops, summits, working with clients, and shifting. Part of our logic is the idea of shifting from a world of doing less harm, which is perhaps what sustainability really gives, the idea of embedded sustainability, really about getting businesses to do less harm, towards actually providing good, which is the idea behind flourishing enterprise, and really what we're calling quantum leadership as we drill into what leaders themselves are doing, leaders of organizations. Across the top, just a couple of things. We have a series of forums every couple of years, which bring different business leaders together. Something we call Aim to Flourish, which is just studying the types of companies that were on the right-hand side of that previous slide, identifying them, understanding their stories, trying to get together a collection, if you will, of those companies that are doing those things. And that's something we call Strategic Innovation Lab, which also explores not only what businesses are doing, but what governments, NGOs, and other parts are doing as well. So let's take a look now at just a couple of things that are happening on this side. And as a first one, I'll ask Ignacio to talk about it.
I'm going to talk about research. It's like an research that started with a project that was funded by the Goethe Foundation. They created the Fuji Declaration in 2014, I guess. And that project was led by Laszlo in terms of gathering people from different specialties, 4 areas: economy, politics, media, and business. So in this project, we try to explore how the principles of consciousness, and actually the Fuji Declaration is like a set of new principles for humanity that are devoted to awakening the divine spark of humanity. That was the main purpose of that foundation, and that main purpose is translated into a set of principles. So we try to explore how these principles were applied in the area of business. So we did some various interviews in different countries like USA, Chile, India, UK, Singapore, and China. And we interviewed managers and CEOs or owners of companies that were on the right side that Joe just presented. And we discovered that in trying to make sense of how this business operates, we discovered that the organizing principles and the business purpose matter, because they are key forces in terms of changing the way in which these companies operate. So based on these initial findings, we tried to make sense and create a theoretical model that could explain how business moved from the left side to the right side. And we named that model that of interconnectedness, like trying to echo this new paradigm of this new way of thinking about the role of consciousness in social systems in general. So in this model, we have the assumption that business are institutional agents that can positively contribute to the world, to the creation of prosperity and flourishing. That's one of the key assumptions, that moving from reducing harm to creating good, or to produce positive impact. And it is focused on understanding what we call the positive impact companies, which is a slightly different understanding of sustainability, moving from doing less harm to the good. Like, for example, we're trying to think about innovations that, for example, instead of reducing the amount of energy that they consume, innovation that really can add energy, for example, to the grid. Or instead of making cars that reduce the consumption of CO2, cars that actually, for example, can provide oxygen. So we are trying to think about what type of things, what type of interpretations, narratives, and interactions make possible those types of innovations. So we define positive impact companies as business organizations that are created and organized to have a net positive impact in economic, social, and environmental terms. Okay? Some examples, just Charles gave a couple of examples. Maurizio also gives some examples of companies that are at that stage. So what I'm going to present here is a model that in some way can help to understand how business can move from doing less harm or just focusing on maximizing profit to get to a high state of consciousness, which we call flourishing organization. In this part, the organizing principles is basically what are the social processes that characterize this type of organizations. So in that side, we have the first stage, which we call shareholder value. We have that the main organizing principle, like the way in which people interpret business, the way in which people interpret interactions, is based on efficiency. So how they can use less resources to get more profit. The next level, we call that effectiveness, because in that stage, that we call sustainable value, businesses are trying to create value not only for shareholders, not only economic value, but also for stakeholders. And in this case, they are trying to maximize the effectiveness. They are trying to maximize the outputs, but involving a wide range of stakeholders. And this is what you have here. This is business purpose, which is mainly based on the what Stuart called yesterday the collective intention. So the axis represents the collective intention. So when we mix these two elements, the business purpose and the organizing principles is what really like make companies to operate in a coherent way. So in this stage, sustainable value, this is what you refer to embedded sustainability. So this is the business case. This is what Mauricio also illustrated with companies that really outperform the standard business when they address social or environmental issues. But we discovered that in general, the majority of companies that are going to that stage are using relationships with stakeholders in an instrumental way. So they are collaborating just if it is good to gain economic returns. Then we discovered that most of the companies that are role models today, and we call them social enterprise, are based on a business group that we call a business as a force for good. So they change a little bit the way in which they think about the role of business in the world and the role of business in creating well-being around people or society. And we saw that the organizing principle that characterized those companies were caring, which is very related to the feminist view or the feminist approach. The ethic of care that is proposed by Carol Gilliam, for example, is a good concept to clarify what we mean by caring. Okay, so there are, for example, these kind of companies. We saw that it's really important for them to have employees that got meaning by working in the organization. They care about relationships with the stakeholders because they value those relationships. They think that those relationships not only help business to grow, but also to promote well-being in society. And we also, since we were trying to understand how business help to awaken this divine spark of how business organizations can help to access this universal consciousness, we also try to characterize what would happen if these principles were embedded into the process of organizing, and what would be the collective intention in that type of organizations. So in that stage, I have to say that probably there are few companies, more probably there are not companies that are fully can be classified in this stage. There are some practices that really moves there, like the ones that Charles explained. I interviewed, for example, a VP of human resources in management in Google, and he explained that one key practice in Google is to give people freedom to express their meaning at work. So that's a practice that really is in this stage. Okay, so how to promote a stage where people can really access this level of consciousness that we have been talking about these 2 days. So the collective intention, we call it that highly flourishing individuals, organizations, society, and biosphere. So it's like embracing the wholeness, which is the organizing principle that is coherent with this kind of purpose. Okay? And what we found more interesting, I guess, in terms of like a practical issue is that we found a big separation between the first 2 levels and the last 2 ones. And that helped us to explain in part why it's so difficult for companies to move from the sustainable value stage to the social enterprise. Because this is a fact. So most of the companies that are seen as examples or role models are here. And most of these companies have been created with this kind of business purpose and with that kind of organizing principles. But what happens if the majority of companies which are in this stage want to move towards the other two stages. And there, we found that there is we call it the ontological threshold. For example, it's something that people need to go through to really move from this stage to this other. It's not about like changing the strategy, it's not about like incorporating practices, but it's about changing the way in which they see business and the way in which they see the role of business organizations in the world. And we found that in these two levels, the main mindset is about separateness. It's a mechanistic, fragmented worldview that permeates most of the systems that govern our society, and business included. And we saw that in the next two levels, there is a sense of connectedness that Chris captured in his book, The Flourishing Enterprise, and it's something that we have been exploring in these 2 days. So here is, we think that is where the challenge is more important. So how we can create business practices, all practices in general, that can be held by business leaders and organizations, which can help them to cross this threshold. And I think in these 2 days, we have been learning from my side, from the business management study, so I learned a lot about how knowledge from different areas, from spirituality especially, and from physics and medicine, etc., can help to cross this threshold by making all this knowledge accessible and available for people to use in organizations. So now we're trying to get empirical evidence about how business can really cross the threshold. And this is part of what Joe and the Quantum Leadership Project is doing. So now we're going to continue with more empirical evidence about all this.
So if consciousness is one of the keys, I want to describe a second stream of research that we're working on, and that is, how do we look at the antecedents of consciousness? What do we do to create, what can leaders do to develop that sense of connectedness, that consciousness of connectedness in the organizations? So we start to take a look back and see if we can explore the practices. If we ask leaders what they're doing, if we ask them how they describe the purpose of their organization, if we ask them about the values that they have, and then we look at the outcomes they're getting, could we understand something? Could we learn something? So let's take a look back at the practices as one element and see how those relate. And I share a model here, our kind of the research model we're following for this. How does that relate to positive social and environmental impacts, but also economic, financial prosperity, the business case, right? How do they lead to both things and create overall greater prosperity? When we look at the practices of connectedness that leaders can do, we're kind of splitting that out. There are personal practices, right, that each person might have. They might meditate or do other things, and I'll say a little more on what we're exploring there in a second. But it might also be organized things, the kind of things that Giles was talking about this morning, that some of the companies that he's been talking to do regularly, whether it's organized group meditations or just checking in before meetings or different things. Between that consciousness of connectedness and the outcomes, greater prosperity, there are some mediating things, right? There are some things in between, and that's what we're also exploring. One element of that is to look at the extent to which there is a shared vision, for example, inside the organization. Very much in line with what I think Stefan was talking about yesterday. Is everybody on board? We have some ways we're trying to measure that. To what extent inside the organization is there compassion available or demonstrated? To what extent are people working together? Right? Is there collaboration and caring amongst each other? But also, to what extent are they guided by a stated greater purpose? Because you could have a shared vision, and your shared vision is to cut costs as much as possible and maximize your short-term profit. That could be your shared vision. So we want to make sure that we combine these elements and try to understand, is there a stated greater purpose? Are these elements together, combined with the consciousness? Now, for exploring this right now, we're doing a survey-based study, trying to, we have 300 some leaders so far, and we're trying to ask them to share their information about the practices that they have, and their questions related to the various elements in that model that I showed you before. And when we ask about practice of connectedness, and also when we interview business leaders, we're trying not to be too defining. In other words, is only meditation a practice of connectedness, or does it have to do yoga? Taking a broader picture, so there might be things that are connecting practices. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's playing music, maybe it's going out for a run, or working in the garden, or praying, right? or reading spiritual texts or other inspirational texts. Maybe it's just getting out in nature, right? Doing things which connect you. Maybe it's having a hobby that's enjoyable. There might be something that is a connecting practice that helps people to tap in to that underlying, common vibration that we've been talking about for the last 2 days. What are the things that leaders can do to experience that, and that will help them to develop that consciousness of connectedness, which will then in turn lead to decisions that result in there. And I know that each person, especially in this room, probably has your particular practice. The other thing I'd like to point out in this, before the final comments about the overall quantum leadership project, is that in the work we're doing so far, this is coming from some surprising places. Practices of connectedness. I talked to a CEO of a company that does turbine engine maintenance. Turbine engine maintenance. Okay? They send crews out to turbine engines, power plants, very roughneck type of a world, right? The last place I would expect the CEO to talk to me about connecting practices and carrying the organization. And we, in our interviews with business leaders, we ask them first to share what their purpose is of their organization, what their vision is, how they view their vision, their mission, and so on. And then we ask them about how they make decisions, and we ask them about their practices, and then we ask them about their personal ways of going about things. And unprompted, this CEO asked me about the company. He said, well, one of the most important things for me is every morning I get up and I take 15 minutes where I just sit quietly and reflect, and then I read the Bible. In this case, he read the Bible every day, which helped him to center on things. And that informed what he did every day with this organization. And then he went on to tell me about the things that they did. He told me about the seminars that he conducts for his crews. So they go out there for 3 months at a time. They live on some site somewhere. Again, with pretty well, mainly men. But when they come back, he makes sure that he has seminars in place where they can develop themselves personally, take care of their families, engage with their communities. Completely surprising place for that to come. So I guess my point here is that we don't need to just look at the companies we suspect are flourishing enterprises. We don't just need to look in whatever Silicon Valley or someplace where people have meditation pods. It's anywhere, right? It could be everywhere. People are tapping into this in those places. Which leads me to the last section that I'd like to talk about, which is the Quantum Leadership Project. It's a research initiative that we're doing. In fact, a number of the members of our team are here. They're conducting interviews with a newer set of business leaders. Maria has done a bunch of interviews in the meantime, and Garrett as well, business interviews. Chris, Julian, myself, Ignacio. So we're all contributing to this process, trying to uncover what are the common elements of what we're calling quantum leaders. People who are able to tap into that realm, to that vibrational field. And we're in the process of expanding. We're probably around 40, 45. I'd like to get a few more in that. We will then have we'll build on that quantitative research that I showed you just before and expand that to get, again, a broader picture of what is really underlying these things. Complete them into a mixed method study. And we envision kind of a platform that can result in a stream of different outputs, one of which will be a book by Fred and Chris called Quantum Leadership. So we're capturing kind of the east and west, the experiences from Fred and the business. I don't know, Fred, if you want to say any words about that, review. A quick overview of 3 different streams that we're working on for the overall